What's up, gamers? My name's Scyushi, and we're back again for another Trove to the Trove video, and today we're going to be doing another beginner's tutorial because it's been a couple years since I ended up doing one of these. I'm a little bit out of touch just because I've been at the end game for so long, but generally speaking, we have actually a lot more new players coming to Trove, and Game Ago thought it would be a good idea for me to end up having some updated tutorials, which I fully well planned on doing anyways, but I never really thought to do like a starting guide again. So we're going to be starting out here in this is just my club world or my clan in the game. And the only reason we're starting here is just to give you guys a bit of an idea of the starting classes in the game. So you're going to actually be able to pick from Candy Bar, Boomeranger, Tomb Raiser, Knight, and Gunslinger at the beginning of the game. But the whole thing is that you can actually craft all of the other classes later on. There's also going to end up being store packs that you can end up purchasing if you choose to do so. That will end up giving you the classes. If you are new to Trove and you decide to go that route, please use the sign up link in the description. Then anything you buy out of the cash shop, I end up making a percentage of it. So it's an awesome way that you can support me by literally just playing this game. But I've been playing Trove for well over 5 years now, and you know, I've been at the end game for the majority of that time, just because you get to the end game and then there's not as much to do. But that doesn't mean that it's not a fantastic game to play. So let's actually hop into the tutorial world, just so that we can kind of, you know, I'll kind of run through the very basic bare bones of this game before I talk about some of the more complex stuff. The other thing too that I gotta be open about this and just say that this tutorial is pretty cool in Trove, but it kind of sets a standard that the rest of the game just doesn't do. Like this whole tutorial kind of has, like, you know, it teaches you the controls of the game, shows you kind of a story and lore with Trove that isn't present for the rest of the game, so it's quite ridiculous. But anyways, let's get into, so the shadows are consuming the world, you can help them escape, but we are under attack, blah blah blah. So we are going to be using just movement, attacking enemies, what have you. It's very, very basic and very straightforward. These quest arrows and even this little dude, unfortunately you don't actually see this guy. You don't actually see this guy out in the open world or anything, but they're trying to teach us how gear works, so you can just right click it while it's in your inventory, or if you're on console it'll be slightly different. The game used to have, just a little Trove trivia for you, it used to have issues where if you were a player that was already powerful and came into the tutorial, it would actually lock out a lot of your controls, but now they're kind of teaching us dodging. So jumping and dodging are something that are pretty important to Trove gameplay wise, I would say, because dodging basically just gives you, like, it makes you invulnerable to taking damage, but then you can see down in the middle of our screen that there's actually going to end up being a cooldown to it as well. Back in the day there used to be no cooldown, and it was awesome because you could actually just use the dodge to very effectively dodge enemy attacks. Now you can only use it for maybe one heavy boss attack or something like that, and then they'll just hit you with another one right after, and it's pretty difficult. Jumping, the cool thing about it is you're gonna default with 2 jump, but later on you end up getting gear or dragons or other items in the game that will essentially just give you more and more jump, so that you can essentially just have, like, I forget what the max amount of jump is, but you can have like 70 or something. It's quite ridiculous. I've never actually tried to go for that myself. Now, this is Toddstrom. You'll see him sometimes during events, so more particularly the Halloween event. Sometimes he'll show up just randomly in dungeons, but for the most part, again, this is setting a precedent that the rest of the game just doesn't have. That portal that they kind of used right there is actually a portal that you can use in club worlds, and it'll be a 2-way street. So think of the game Portal. You literally will put down 2 of the same color portal, and then when you go through one, you can go through another one and go right back to it. That's got to do with the professions, which we'll get into a little bit later in the video. This is going to end up being your cornerstone, so this is completely custom. I actually have it set to my really crappy farm. I have this set up specifically to farm for rampage bosses, which is something that we probably won't cover in today's video. But anyways, you can go into build mode and you can build this, and it's going to end up being absolutely permanent and saved and stay the way that you end up building it, which is kind of nice. What is this little goat thing? What's he doing here? I don't even know what that is. So they want us to destroy a couple blocks here. Unfortunately, I'll have to do that. Rip. And then I can just throw down more blocks as well. So the building is actually pretty cool in this game. You can use it to very effectively build some pretty cool stuff, as I will show you guys later in my club world. This cornerstone is just a bad example. Here it's trying to teach us about ore, which there's going to be various ores in the game, and you'll kind of want to go out of your way to get them. Later on, you will be able to craft bombs that you can literally, I might be able to actually use some of these in the tutorial right here. You can just throw them and they'll grab the ore and kind of destroy the environment. We can't destroy this environment because it's all like preset, but it's a very effective way of actually mining a lot later. Not to mention there's going to end up being all these various stats, lasermancy being one of them that you may or may not see on gear sometimes. Lasermancy literally is going to give you faster digging, because I've already got some pretty fast digging right now. If you guys are just starting with this game, you're going to notice that digging these ores just takes quite a long time. Not to mention, there's going to be stronger ores later in the game that you can mine as a resource. But generally speaking, you'll try to go for these when you need them. At the same time, the game just constantly wants you to end up getting these items. So it's definitely worth like going for them. Okay, here they actually want me to use a bomb. So let's just destroy that. And then we can always replace our cornerstone somewhere else. That's kind of the cool thing about cornerstones. I remember that was one of the big key things that I liked about this game back when I started in, like, I don't know, I started back when it was like in a humble bundle deal and you had to pay to get into it or whatever. I don't know. But what they're trying to tell us now is to use a crafting bench, which I don't actually know if I have a full crafting bench in this. So let me just see here. Yeah, and it's locking out a lot of my controls. So what they're essentially trying to teach us is to use the crafting bench so that we can end up crafting like the loot collector, which the loot collector is literally going to be where you will basically destroy gear that you end up finding out in the world that you don't necessarily want to have equip anymore. And by destroying it, you're going to end up getting various resources. The resources can be used to upgrade gear or just to end up buying things. That yellow item right there is called flux, and that is basically going to end up being the big currency of the game. As you end up collecting items in the loot collector as well, you'll actually see that most items you'll loot collect for the first time will actually say that you do not have this style in your collection. So a big part of Trove is the collections menu, which it doesn't seem to be letting me actually use right now. Jesus. Okay, this tutorial is kind of a bit of a mess, but let's just kind of move on. So the collections menu is literally just collecting visual styles of weapons and stuff. Here, I can actually kind of cheese it. So these, for example, I have loot collected because I found them out in the adventure world, or I used a style saver, which is an item that you can get sometimes that will end up just giving you random styles you don't already have. Each of these items will give you like one Trove mastery. These are just my favorites. If we go to all of them, there's literally hundreds of them, not to mention just for every class in the game. But the thing that's so cool is you can literally just click on this, and now it visually ended up changing the staff that I'm using. So if you're wondering about the video effects floating around my character, though, that is actually got to do with having a higher tiered gear. You got to get your gear all the way up to what we call stellar, which is going to be golden gear, and then from that point on, there's gear that is stronger than stellar, but the whole point is that you will be able to have these vanity colors and flames and stuff like that all over your armor and junk like that. I probably shouldn't be on the Tomb Raiser right now because I'm sure it's confusing people, but these are the minions that just auto summon with this guy. So anyways, hopefully we can just skip ahead. No? Really? You're not gonna let me just do that? Oh, there we go. So it did let us kind of skip ahead. I guess we were just waiting for that guy to stop talking. So at that crafting table, you'll pretty much craft like all of your basic needs, your basic functions. Everyone's going to default with the same cornerstone at the beginning, but you can kind of customize it, and then people can see it out in the world and stuff like that. And it's a cool way that you can kind of just show off what you got. So this is going to end up being a mag rider. This is pretty useless. I don't even know why the tutorial has this. I mean, it's in the game, so cool. But this is not something that is ever used. You know, maybe people in club worlds will end up building tracks that you can end up using these to kind of explore your club worlds or something like that, but not really that much. If you end up holding the jump button, you'll actually trigger your wings. And wings in this game essentially let you glide. So the better the wings that you have, the slower your fall is going to be, and the longer you'll essentially be able to go. The starting wings in the game, I think, are the only ones that actually have different stats where you will descend very, very quickly compared to the other wings that you'll get in the game. And speaking of the mastery points that I said you would end up getting for unlocking various cosmetic items and stuff like that. So through the mastery tree, you can see there, you know, I'm sitting at like rank 665. This is the Trove mastery. This is the main mastery of the game. Then there's going to be the GEODE mastery, which we probably won't end up talking about today if we even get to that point. But basically, as you end up going through mastery and unlocking more and more mastery points, you'll unlock these different levels, which will essentially end up giving you various items that you can end up using. And at level 20, you can use the trading post and the player market, which is going to be very, very useful if you're just starting out, because you can end up using it to very effective degrees to end up getting a lot of the resources in the game. Because, you know, why farm for 1,000,000 shapestone? I'm just exaggerating. That's the ore that we mined earlier. Why farm for that when you could just farm for flux and then just buy the ore? And honestly, you'll probably end up saving a lot more time by just doing that. So now they're trying to teach us how the flasks work, which there's multiple flasks in the game. The biggest one that I would recommend that you guys go for is in the actual cash shop, which it's not letting me bring up that menu right now. But the one that I'm actually rocking right now is called Death Defying. Death Defying is one of the most useful vials in the game. So there's going to be vials and emblems. I hope I'm not overwhelming you guys with all this stuff, but you know, we got a lot to cover. The vials themselves will have differing functions. Death Defying's function is that as soon as you reach death, it will automatically consume another potion. And that's insanely useful for pretty much everything in the game. Not necessarily at the beginning of the game, but as you end up getting later and later into the game, the enemies essentially will just end up one-shotting you, because the builds in this game are literally DPS or tank. So you are either all damage and have no health, or you're a very few select classes that can actually be used as a tank, in which case you have nothing but health. For those characters, it doesn't matter as much to end up using Death Defying, but if you're a damage character, for the most part, this is the biggest thing that you're going to want to go for, and you'll just get it out of the cash shop for 10,000. Is it 10,000 or 20,000? I'm not exactly sure on the number, guys, but it's going to end up being cubits. So cubits are going to end up being this daily bar you see up in the top right. You can fill this up every day, and essentially it's going to end up being a time-gated item that you'll be able to use to buy various, you know, free-to-play items out of the cash shop. You can't really buy everything with it, but you can buy a lot of things. And you know, I'd recommend you go for Death Defying. There's also going to end up being some other vials that you can go for, which you might want to go for later just because of the mastery that you'll get out of having all of them again. But on top of that, we've also got emblems, and some of these will be in the store as well, but we'll talk about those a little bit later. This is going to be a rejuvenation station, so you can always, so long as you have one of these, you'll have a certain amount of flasks that you can have. And as soon as you end up consuming a bunch of them, you can just use one of these to get all of your flasks back. Which, I mean, obviously you're not going to be able to use these in like every dungeon in the game or anything, but you can have them on your cornerstone. Your cornerstone will also act as a respawn point as well, so it pays to plant it down as often as you can when you're outside of like a difficult dungeon or something like that. So anyways, what they're trying to teach us now is the hub world button. So there's a button to do this, but more importantly, there is going to end up being the Trovian Atlas, which we'll get into that in a minute because I just want to show you the cash shop stuff. So a lot of things, honestly speaking, are going to be very daunting and kind of you got to watch out for the cash shop because a lot of this stuff is kind of a beginner's trap, right? Some of it is just for mastery. Some of it is going to act like it's useful and then it's not. Whatever, but anyways, here's Death Defying. So we have some emblems that we can get as well. Golden keys are used to basically there's a box you can get while you're out in the world randomly from enemies, and you use a golden key to give the guaranteed rare drop out of them, which usually is going to be a mount. So my recommendation out of the emblems, if you have to get them, obviously is going to be Martial and Arcane. So the way that damage works in Trove is there's two damage types. There's going to be physical damage and magic damage. And depending on the class that you're using, you're going to end up having, you know, either or. So you want to end up having the martial emblem to trigger for physical based characters and the arcane emblem to trigger for magic based characters. And I'll go through which characters have which damage types in a moment. But the whole point is that I'm on a Tomb Raiser, which is kind of using magic damage. So we'll actually have this emblem that gives us 250% normal magic damage for 3 seconds. So anytime I consume a flask, I'm going to have that trigger. I have a visual mod on that makes it that blue flame that you saw on my character. And then the other one that I'm using is Unyielding, which the Unyielding emblem is going to end up being very, very useful because, oh no, it's not in this shop. Whoops. Unyielding basically gives you invulnerability frames after an enemy damages you, or essentially when you take a pot. That's what that cube is around my character, because otherwise in this game, that's why it can be so brutal later on, is enemies will literally just, you know, they can just hit you and melt your flasks. You know, they'll drain your health and drain your flasks all at once because of the way that the game actually works. So before we end up going to the Trovian Atlas, let's talk about the hub area here, because there's a lot of important things that you got to keep in mind with it. So over there is going to be where you're going to craft dragons. They'll take various items in the game that you'll need to end up getting just by playing, essentially. Dragon souls, these guys are going to be kind of an old school dragon, so they don't really work the same as the current dragons do in the game. The old school dragons, you'll have to basically craft a certain amount of these souls. You eat the soul, and then you end up getting various dragons that are going to kind of ascend in their abilities as you end up consuming more souls. But the more common dragons are going to be based off of having the dragon egg, or just like this is crafting the dragon egg based on having various resources. Pumpkin, you can plant them, but usually they only end up growing during you know, the Halloween times and stuff like that. Crystallized cloud you get from Sky Realms. Flux you get for loot collecting gear, or just grind it and sell items out on the player market kind of stuff. And then, you know, you can end up using the eggs to end up crafting the dragons. The dragon coins are basically going to be on the hour. You will see usually an event will pop up in the top right, whereas it'll be like a coin collection challenge or what have you. And essentially that is how you're going to end up getting the dragon coins. It's very, very time gated for a free-to-play player. If you aren't afraid of cash shop, you can end up grabbing these greater dragon caches. These can drop dragon eggs. Very rarely they'll drop like tradable dragon eggs as well, so sometimes you can just buy them on the player market. But the whole thing is these are extremely expensive, and more often than not you just get dragon coins out of them. There's also these boosters for dragon coins. For a certain amount of time you'll get like a bunch of extra coins and stuff, and it's weird. Over here is where a certain merchant is going to show up basically every 2 weeks. I have videos on that covered like pretty much every time he shows up, so if you're not subbed to the channel, you can for that. Over here you can see this is the barbershop, so we can change our character's head and our skin color and all that stuff. I just have headless just because it's funny. This is going to be the trading post, so you use this and somebody else uses it at the same time. They'll see your name, then you can start trading with each other. The personal chest is actually going to be across all of your characters. So the thing that I really love about Trove is that essentially you have one save file. So you just have one account where you are unlocking all these other classes, and as you level with each one of them, all of that progress is going to stay. So I can literally swap to another class right now seamlessly while still playing, you know, just on the same save file and on the same login and stuff like that, which is, it's pretty cool because, you know, most MMOs you usually have to go back to the main menu to switch your class, and then you have to start from scratch with your class. Whereas with this, you kind of end up doing, you know, stuff like this. And then the fact that the personal chest is going to be shared across the board is nice. You'll have to unlock these other tabs as you go. Same with your inventory. You'll have to unlock all these extra tabs as well. This is essentially an loot collector. Over here is the delves. I already have other tutorials covering the delves, so we'll skip over that today. I also have other tutorials talking about the dragons if you want to know more details. So I'll probably have to do an updated video on my dragon, on just dragons in general. But in short, the delves is going to essentially be an infinite dungeon that you can hop into that will end up being kind of cool. I mean, it's kind of claustrophobic, but it's really good for XP and stuff. There's a lot of different moving parts to it, so that's why I'll have a separate video that talks about it more specifically. It's actually the newest update to Trove as well, so pretty exciting. It's not out on consoles just yet, but this is going to end up being Bomber Royale. This is kind of the PvP of the game. It's fun if you can end up getting a group of people to end up doing it. There once upon a time was actually Capture the Flag and Team Deathmatch and stuff like that, which you can still make custom maps for that in your club world, but the hub and main game itself kind of doesn't really support it. So you'll have to like bring all of your friends into the portal, as opposed to the Bomber Royale. If we hop into here, it's literally going to throw us into a match with other people. So anyways, over there is going to end up being a bunch of club worlds, so you can kind of hop in those, chat with people, see new clubs, junk like that, kind of end up talking with like people in the club worlds and maybe end up joining them or whatever. I don't know. It's entirely up to you. This will take us to the Geode Sanctuary, which we'll talk about that after. This is going to be the Radiant Merchant, so he'll buy things for what I call Radiant Pancakes, Radiant Sovereigns. That's a cash shop item. But this is going to end up being the Trovian Atlas I mentioned previously. So this thing is actually phenomenal because it just opens up all of the worlds. You can see these are all the different biomes that you can end up interacting with. I don't know why you can end up just moving this map as much as you can. Like, it's kind of ridiculous. But as you end up gaining power, you'll unlock more of the worlds and so on and so forth. You don't have to go and interact with that thing, though. There is going to be a hotkey that's... my face cam is covering it right now, but for PC, it's going to be Control A, and you can just literally open this anywhere that you want, right? So normally you'll be going into the Medieval Highlands. Each of these different worlds is going to focus on a different biome, all the way up to U6 difficulty, where it is essentially going to end up being the Forbidden Spires and all of the previous biomes. And then finally, when you get to U7, it's pretty much just absolutely everything. Let's hop into an adventure so I can show you. This is going to be the bulk of the actual game that you're going to be doing if you're not tackling the delves, which again can end up being a bit daunting. And on top of that, might be hit or miss whether or not you actually enjoy it. So this is going to end up being essentially an adventure world. You can see that this dark grass biome that has sunflowers on it, this is going to end up being a peaceful hill biome. So these will always end up generating with a bunch of different cornerstones. Sometimes they'll end up generating with sunflower dungeons. So you'll basically go in there, and it's so that you can end up collecting a resource that you can use for the gardening profession, which will, again, we'll dabble just very slightly on each of those today, because I'll probably just end up doing upgraded tutorials and all that stuff. But you can see there is fog of war, and as we go out and explore the world, we see quite literally there's going to end up being dungeons out in the world, right? So there's going to be 1-star dungeons, there's going to be 3-star dungeons, so on and so forth. The normal map in the game, this is a modded map that makes it much smaller. The normal map will show a legend of all of the different things that you can basically just see out in the world, so that'll end up covering it better than I can. But what we're going to be doing with Trove in general is you basically go into the dungeon, kill the boss. You can kill the side enemies if you want, but you don't really get that much XP or anything out of it, so there's not much point. Ignore that warning on the screen. That's just tomes, which are an item that you complete by doing dungeons, but not really something you gotta worry about at the beginning of the game. So anyways, we beat the dungeon, open the loot chest, grab the items, take the exit portal, repeat. That's pretty much Trove in a nutshell, which is a lot of fun because all the characters end up playing differently, you know, and they all end up having their own strengths and weaknesses, and certain characters obviously just aren't as good as others. Unfortunately, they're very unbalanced, but anyways, as you end up getting stronger, you can end up going to the next biome, and then the next biome, and then the next biome. So this is where power rank and then your class level comes into play. I'd say that unless you're a more powerful class like the Vanguard or something like that, you're probably going to want to stick to the suggested level, because even if you can already go to the next area, the suggested level usually is going to give you the most XP. And then as soon as you end up going beyond that suggested level, you might want to move into the next world just so that you end up getting more XP so that you can level up more. But you can see when we go to this next area, levels 4 to 5 and power rank 60 required. So power rank is going to essentially be it's kind of a way that the game tracks your stats. So it's kind of a very easy way to summarize based on the items that you have, based on the mastery that you have, based on the gear that you have, based on the gems that you have, which we'll talk about gems in a bit because that's the big focal point of the game. Essentially, through all of that, you'll end up having this power rank up here. You end up getting dragons. They'll give you more power rank as well, so on and so forth, right? But essentially, the higher your power rank usually ends up meaning the stronger that you are, except that Trove doesn't really consider individual stats for power ranks. So you could be a character that has nothing but max health and does no damage, but the game might still consider that you're at a very high power rank just because the gear that you have that's giving you that suggests that you're powerful enough to be able to handle a certain area. But if you don't have all damage later, it doesn't matter at the beginning of the game, but if you don't have all damage a lot later and just have max health, well, the power rank doesn't really matter as much. It's just kind of a visual number that people use for bragging rights and stuff like that. I mean, it still has a point to the game, obviously, but it's just not as important as the game likes to pretend that it is, especially because with the delves that ended up coming, that infinite dungeon I was talking about, there's actually a new stat that is used later on in the game called light, which I guess we can kind of talk about this here, but first of all, I want to just kind of show you guys another example. Like we'd go into this dungeon, we would complete it, so on and so forth. You know, that's a 3-star dungeon, so it's going to have more enemies and stronger enemies as well. In this ice biome, there's going to end up being a different ore that you can end up getting. That's just the same old orange, or I keep saying orange, that's the same purple or pink shape stone, but you can find glacial shards and stuff like that, and sometimes enemies will end up giving you various items that you couldn't get from another biome. Anyways, as you continue through the game, you'll end up getting gem boxes. I don't seem to have any on my person right now. Okay, actually I do. So gem boxes eventually you'll end up getting in the game. And what they're going to do is they're going to end up being boxes that you can open that will essentially give you gems. So if I open this right here, you can see I'm getting shadow level gems already. If I got a rare drop out of it, it would go to radiant right there. Perfect timing. And then higher than that would end up being stellar gems and so on and so forth, right? So the gems themselves are going to end up being different rarity based off of which world you're taking on. And that's where you can see these offshooted maps. This is an elemental world. So as we end up getting to this point where we're in U2, we could end up going to U3, just continuing the same thing that we already talked about, where we're just going through the biomes and slowly getting to more worlds. By completing these normal worlds, we essentially just end up getting a shadow gem box that can give us any element type of a gem, as opposed to water, air, and lava. Each of these worlds will give us a specific gem box for that elemental type, period. Okay, and the reason for that is because as you level up your character in this gems tab, you can see that you can only put fire gems here, you can only put water gems here, you can only put air gems here, and then cosmic gems here, which cosmic gems are kind of the late game gem that you'll end up getting in the game. That comes into play with the geode surface and the delves dungeon I mentioned. So with the geode surface, essentially, you know, the only way that you can end up doing damage in these worlds is by having a certain amount of light value. So you'll end up getting the light stat on your character by having cosmic gems, and on top of that, getting crystal gear. So you know, in all of the other worlds, as you end up getting more magic find in the game, you can end up getting higher tiers of gear to drop, and essentially stellar is going to be the best for base gear that doesn't do anything for light value. But eventually you'll end up getting to crystal gear once you get to the geode surface. That's these red biomes right here. U8 can drop crystal 1, U9 can drop crystal 1 and 2, and then U10 can drop crystal 1, 2, and 3. And then the delve caves that I mentioned earlier is the only area that you can currently get crystal 4, which is currently the strongest gear in the entire game. So as you end up getting the crystal gear, which you can see on my person right here, you know, they're all blue and shiny and stuff. The crystal gear is essentially going to end up being stronger than stellar. That just gives you a light value, and having a light value is what's going to be required to do damage to enemies in like the geode surface and the delves, because essentially the enemies are going to have a darkness stat, or consider it an armor value, and that the light stat that we have on our players is just essentially going to end up being an armor penetration or something like that, right? So that covers the light value. As you end up going through the game, there's going to end up being the shadow towers over here, which these have been butchered. The shadow towers don't really serve much of a purpose anymore. Essentially, it's going to end up being a boss rush. So let's actually hop into the shadow tower hub area, just because this area is still important, even if the shadow towers themselves aren't as much. You'll basically be able to go into these shadow arenas and fight a boss over and over again. Sometimes they can end up dropping mounts rarely. They won't really have very good gear for you because a lot of the gear has actually been pulled out of there in favor of the delves. Most of all, you're going to fight specific bosses so that you can complete some badges. So these gameplay badges are nothing. They're pretty much in-game achievements. And they'll be what gives you a bulk of the mastery in the game. There's actually quite a few badges that I'm missing right now just because it's so difficult for me to end up grinding for some of them. Essentially, Shadow Towers was what was lagging a lot of the servers. So that's why they ended up having this recent big update that ended up moving all of the Shadow Tower items into the Delves Caves. So as you end up completing the Delves Caves and stuff, you'll end up getting... essentially you'll be able to get Titan souls, lunar souls and stuff, and you'll have to come over here to the shadowy merchant. This is where you'll also get shadow shards from the delves as well. You can craft shadow cash, and out of this you can get hearts of darkness rarely, and this is an item that you'll use to craft these various allies and junk. Titan souls, you can craft all this stuff. Titan treasure can end up unboxing some flux for you guys. Lunar souls are gonna be the big ones that you're gonna want to get. Titan souls and lunar souls are a limited item, like you can get a limited quantity of them per week from the delves, and you'll at the beginning of the game anyways be spending all of your lunar souls on these empowered gem boxes, because this essentially is going to be how you can end up getting empowered gems. So while lesser gems are just gotten from going out into the world and farming, the empowered gems that you see right here are actually gotten by spending your hard-earned lunar souls and stuff like that. You can also, out of these boxes, end up getting class gem key fragments or just class gem keys, and essentially what those are is you'll end up going into the Everdark when you're strong enough to do it, and you don't have to go to the U9 Everdark. There's literally no difference between these two difficulties, so you may as well just go to U8 because it's easier. But you'll end up essentially taking on a Colosseum that looks like this, and if you can end up surviving to the end and beating the Colosseum, you'll be able to use that class gem key on the chest to get your hands on a class gem itself. Out of the novice crafting bench that we didn't actually get to see in the tutorial, you can craft a bunch of different things, like a forge that'll end up being so you can upgrade gear, ring crafting, chaos core and stuff like that. These are all going to end up being very relevant things that you can use in the game, but through the adventures crafting bench, you're going to be able to craft gem items, and this is where you can end up getting class gem key fragments from empowered gem fragments, which is from loot collecting in power gems, or you can end up just crafting a class gem key out of fragments that you get out of empowered gem boxes. So while I already have a in-depth tutorial on the delves, I do plan on making kind of a shorter, more brief tutorial, and then on top of that having tutorials that talk about specific items like Titan souls and lunar souls and stuff like that, because generally it can be quite confusing for a lot of people. But essentially what's going to happen in the delves here, this is a public portal. There's going to be private portals, challenge portals, stuff like that, but it's going to end up being an infinite generated cave, and the deeper you go, the better loot you get, and eventually you can end up coming across shadow chests, and you'll have to open those with keys. You end up getting fragments to craft these keys from just farming normal dungeons out in the world, and then you'll use those keys in the delves to end up getting your Titan souls, lunar souls, and other various resources that normally were gotten from the Shadow Tower, but now the Shadow Tower, there really isn't that much reason to pay attention to it. So at the adventurers crafting table, this is where you make bombs, this is where you make your rejuvenation stations. An origin portal you can throw down, and it'll always have a two-way portal that you can take to the spawn of your world that you're adventuring in. You can craft some mounts, you can craft some wings, so on and so forth. This is where you'll end up crafting delve delve keys. The builder's crafting table is literally for builders, so you can use a lot of this stuff just for your club world and stuff, including like the gardening stations and junk. I have videos already talking about all the gardening 2.0 stuff, so we probably won't end up covering that today either. But a lot of this is just to make all these blocks and make all these prop items and stuff, and you can find recipe dungeons while you're out in the world, and you can consume those recipes to end up unlocking different prop items like this that you can end up putting down for your builds and junk like that. And yeah, it's pretty cool. So over here, you know, ring crafting, rune crafting, and then there's gardening over here. Basically the way that the professions are going to work is you'll have to craft 50 of this item to get 50 points so that you can advance to the next tier, and then you gotta craft 50 of an item within this tier to get to the next tier, so on and so forth. And essentially you can get really cool items from the later tiers. The rings are probably going to end up being the most useful for a starting player though, just because you're going to end up literally having a ring that you can equip on your character to end up giving you extra stats. Food comes into place with the gardening. The delves also gives you some food items, but these are going to be a consumable item that you can equip that will slowly degrade over time. And then as the one item degrades, it'll end up starting to consume the next one, and so on and so forth, and you'll just end up getting the stats that it shows on the food. There's lots of other things to this game though, guys. There's fishing, you know, there's just trying to go for like pretty much all the gear that you want and just go for adventuring and stuff. And ultimately your goal throughout doing all the dungeons and everything is so that you can slowly end up getting to the point where you can go to the geode surface, and that at that point you're going to be able to pretty much do the end game dungeons and stuff, where you'll be grinding for crystal gear so that you can get more light value, and grinding for cosmic gems so that you can end up essentially getting more light value on these as well, because the lesser gems are going to be pretty easy to get, while the empowered gem is going to be a lot more difficult. So last but not least, I thought we would have time to talk about this, but this is the geode caving area, and this is probably going to end up being something a lot more confusing to you guys, so we'll probably save this for another video as well. Most of all, I just wanted to kind of cover the basis so that you understand the mechanics of the game and how to progress, and then from this point on, a lot of this other stuff ends up getting a lot more complicated, and we can have just one whole video completely dedicated to it. But in short, this is going to be an adventure caving area where there will be no combat. Essentially, you're going into each of these zones to mine for specific resources that you'll end up using at various NPCs that are around in this hub area. This is a completely separate from the normal Trove hub. This is going to be the Geode Sanctuary hub, and a lot of these cave resources you can actually get in the Delves caves that I mentioned previously. But again, I'll have separate videos on all of this stuff. I already have separate videos on a lot of these, so you guys can end up searching the channel. But I'll try to end up putting as much of them in the description as I can. I usually end up having all of the big videos that I recommend in the description, but I still am long overdue to end up making updated tutorials on all of this stuff, especially because the Delves has kind of changed a lot of how the game actually works and game progression. But there you go. That's as best I can do to put Trove into a nutshell. I mean, I guess if I put it in a nutshell, it's just an MMO where you go at an adventure and stuff like that. But anyways, I don't mean to ramble. Thanks for watching. Smash like, sub for more, buy the merch you want, support the channel, and have yourselves a fantastic day. Sayonara and stay epic, gamers.